When my future son-in-law told me I was unwanted, I realized he had mistaken my kindness for weakness. I had paid deposits, signed checks, offered my home as their venue, and handled every detail while he contributed nothing but demands. The night before the wedding, he smirked and told me the gift he wanted was my disappearance, so I decided to give it to him, exactly as requested. He thought forcing me out would give him control. Instead, it gave me clarity. And the next morning, when guests opened their envelopes, the real power shifted. My name is Marisol Avery, I'm 59, and I thought I was doing everything a good mother should. I paid deposits, coordinated vendors, answered endless calls, and offered my home for the ceremony to ease financial pressures. I believed kindness built bridges. But the night before the rehearsal dinner, I realized some people mistake kindness for weakness. The man I would soon call my son-in-law smirked with entitlement, dismissing my role in the wedding as if I were merely a prop. In that moment, I understood I had given too much to someone who respected me too little, and I knew something had to change. At rehearsal, when laughter filled the garden and guests mingled, he pulled her aside near the arbor. His voice dropped, not to whisper gently, but to sharpen his words like blades. He said she was a burden, that her presence ruined the vibe, and that the perfect wedding gift would be her disappearance. His eyes gleamed with arrogance. He believed he'd won. She stood frozen, absorbing the cruelty masked as confidence. No raised voice, no witnesses, just a private moment meant to humiliate. His intent was clear: erase her, claim the space, and assert dominance. But the insult didn't break her. It awakened her. When she rejoined the group, her daughter noticed her expression and approached. But instead of defending her, she hesitated, glancing nervously toward her fiancé as if seeking permission to speak. The silence cut deeper than the insult. It wasn't just fear, it was loyalty misplaced. Friends and family laughed nearby, oblivious to the storm brewing. She realized her daughter had become entangled in the charm and ambition of the man who despised her mother. Disappointment settled heavier than anger. She didn't blame her daughter, not yet, but she understood that fighting this battle alone would only strengthen their control. So she smiled and excused herself, knowing silence could be more powerful than confrontation. That night while the house slept, she replayed his words, not as wounds but as instructions. Disappear. The simplicity of it intrigued her. If she left, the wedding could still proceed, but without her support, without her venue, without her financing. She realized disappearing didn't mean surrendering. It meant removing herself from a stage she built, letting him stumble without her. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, she opened a notebook, listed assets, contacts, and plans. If they wanted her gone, she would go, but she would take her contributions with her. And the consequences would unfold without her raising a single voice. The next morning, she contacted the real estate agent she trusted, one who valued confidentiality. They met discreetly in a cafe away from town, where she explained she needed to sell the house quickly yet legally. The agent reviewed documents, verified ownership, and assured her that an expedited sale was possible given demand. She felt a strange calm wash over her. The home was filled with memories, but memories weren't enough to justify disrespect. She signed preliminary papers and the timeline was set in motion. It wasn't an emotional decision, it was strategic, and it was the first step toward reclaiming control. Over the next 48 hours, she worked with lawyers, agents, and appraisers to finalize the sale. She reviewed deeds, ensured no loopholes existed, and filed documents confirming the transfer. Everything was above board, clean, legal, irreversible. She didn't sabotage the wedding, she simply removed the foundation they assumed was theirs. The house, once the crown jewel of their plans, became untouchable. She imagined the moment they would arrive expecting a venue and find only confusion. It wasn't revenge, it was consequence. She had given them trust freely. Now she reclaimed it legally. On the morning before the wedding, she packed quietly. No dramatic exit, no farewell speech. She left a simple note on the counter, not for the groom, but for her daughter, short, honest, and without accusation. Then she locked the door one last time and drove away before sunrise, watching dawn unfold as if symbolizing a new beginning. She didn't feel guilt. She felt liberation. For decades, she'd sacrificed without question. Now she chose herself. And somewhere behind her, a wedding's foundation was already beginning to crack, but she kept driving. The wedding morning began with excitement and chatter as guests arrived dressed in their finest. But confusion spread quickly when they noticed the absence of the hostess, the woman who had planned every detail. The house was locked, the lights off, and no staff stood ready to greet them. Guests exchanged puzzled glances, assuming she would appear any moment. As time passed, irritation whispered through the crowd. The groom brushed off concerns, claiming she was being dramatic, but the unease grew. Something felt fundamentally wrong. The place held the echo of a celebration, but no host, and without her, nothing was truly prepared. While others worried, the groom savored the moment. He strutted through the venue grounds with smug confidence, assuming he had finally pushed her out and asserted dominance. He bragged to his friends about taking control and mocked the mother's overbearing behavior, painting himself as a hero who defended his bride. Arrogance blinded him to the growing logistical disaster. He smirked at her absence, believing it proved his power. To him, winning meant removing her influence. What he didn't realize was that her disappearance wasn't defeat, it was the quiet beginning of his public unraveling. His victory walk would soon become a march into humiliation. The bride noticed the cracks: missing Dacre, absent caterers, unconfirmed deliveries, but pride and pressure smothered doubt. Her friends reassured her that everything would be fine, insisting her fiancé was right about her mother being difficult. She clung to their validation, desperate to believe she hadn't chosen poorly. She told herself her mother's absence was petty drama, not warning, yet unease churned in her stomach. She couldn't deny the venue felt wrong, hollow, incomplete. Still, she silenced instinct, choosing loyalty to the man she loved over the woman she came from. It was a choice she would soon regret deeply. The first true panic erupted when catering vans arrived and found they couldn't enter the property. Locks had been changed, and ownership papers didn't match the wedding planner's agreements. Staff called in confusion, saying they couldn't unload equipment or set up tables. The groom's irritation shifted to alarm, and the bride's calm began to crack. Without access, no food could be prepared, no chairs placed, no ceremony arranged. The illusion of control evaporated. Vendors demanded answers, guests murmured restlessly. The wedding that was supposed to symbolize unity now teetered on disarray, and no one yet understood how deeply that chaos would cut. Just when tension peaked, a sharply dressed lawyer entered the scene, carrying a briefcase and an unreadable expression. He asked for the groom by name, requested a private word, and presented a sealed folder. The groom opened it with shaking hands, expecting a trivial legal issue, maybe permits or contracts. Instead, he stared at official documentation, confirming the property had been sold and no longer belonged to the family. His face was drained of color. The lawyer explained, calmly and publicly, that any event held there was unauthorized. Guests overheard enough to sense something monumental had occurred. The groom's confidence crumbled, replaced by dread. As panic rippled through the venue, assistants hired by the lawyer moved methodically through the reception area, placing identical envelopes at every table setting. The envelopes bore no names, only a simple wax seal. Guests whispered, speculating whether they contained wedding updates, apologies, or legal notices. The bride watched with growing fear, sensing the message wasn't celebratory. The groom attempted to intercept the staff but was politely blocked. The sight of those envelopes, a quiet army of secrets, turned the elegant reception into a courtroom in waiting. The wedding no longer felt like a beginning. It felt like a revelation waiting to unfold. The once festive atmosphere shifted to hushed conversations. Guests leaned toward one another, exchanging theories. Had there been a family dispute? Financial trouble? Scandal? Some believed the mother had sabotaged the event out of spite. Others suspected a deeper betrayal. The bride's distant relatives murmured about overheard arguments, while friends scanned the crowd, waiting for someone to explain. The tension grew thick enough to taste. The groom attempted to maintain composure, but sweat traced his temples. Everyone could feel it. The wedding was no longer about vows. It was about truth, and whatever lay inside those envelopes would change everything. At the coordinator's signal, guests finally tore open the envelopes. The rustle of paper echoed across the silent venue as curiosity turned to shock. Inside each envelope lay not a sentimental note or schedule, but a photocopy of the property sale contract, complete with dates, signatures, and the new owner's information. The groom's smile disintegrated as whispers turned to gasps. It dawned on everyone that the venue they had admired wasn't the couple's to claim anymore. The guests had been invited to a wedding built on entitlement, not love. The spectacle he wanted now belonged to his humiliation, not his glory. The document left no room for interpretation. It clearly showed the home had been sold days prior, legally and irrevocably. The groom's boastful story of receiving the house as a gift now sounded foolish. Guests examined the paperwork closely, pointing to the sale price and transfer details, realizing the mother had strategically ensured the property couldn't be used without her. The groom's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment, but he had no explanation that didn't expose his arrogance. The bride stared at the document, confusion clouding her features. The wedding, once envisioned as a fairy tale, now dissolved into a legal reality check. As guests flipped the pages, they found additional documents, screenshots of messages where the groom insisted the house be put in his name to secure the marriage. His tone in the messages was cold, transactional, and self-serving. He referenced the house as an investment opportunity, not a home. Guests murmured, recognizing manipulation disguised as romance. The bride's hands trembled as she read the messages aloud, realizing she had mistaken coercion for commitment. The groom lunged to snatch the papers away, but several relatives blocked him. His own words unmasked his intentions, leaving him exposed in front of everyone he sought to impress. The envelope contained one more revelation, a draft of a prenuptial agreement he had prepared without her knowledge. It outlined that, in case of separation, he would retain ownership of assets gained during marriage, including the house he pressured her to claim. There was no mention of emotional partnership or fairness. It was exploitation in legal form. The bride's breath caught as she realized the extent of his deceit. Her dream wedding now felt like a financial acquisition. Tears welled not from heartbreak alone, but from betrayal. She began to see the pattern. Love was never his goal. Possession was. The murmurs became outrage. Guests confronted him directly. Was the marriage a business transaction? Did he love the bride or the house? His attempts to deny the accusations faltered under the weight of documented evidence. Even his closest friends and his own family looked disgusted. The narrative he cultivated of being a devoted partner crumbled, revealing greed as the driving force. The bride's relatives, once skeptical of her mother's absence, now understood. The true villain wasn't the missing mother, it was the man standing before them. His reputation, meticulously built through charm and lies, shattered in an instant. The atmosphere shifted from anticipation to indignation. Some guests stormed out, refusing to witness the farce. Others stayed only to watch the inevitable collapse. Conversations turned accusatory, condemning his manipulation and entitlement. The wedding planner, disgusted, packed her materials. The officiant refused to proceed. Vendors demanded payment up front, knowing the couple's access to the house and funds was compromised. The groom's facade evaporated, leaving him exposed and powerless. He tried to blame the mother, calling her vindictive, but guests countered. She had simply protected herself after being mistreated. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth. Within minutes, the wedding unraveled completely. Decorations were removed, music silenced, and guests dispersed. The bride walked away from the altar, head spinning with humiliation and clarity. The groom shouted after her, but his words fell flat. No apology could undo the greed that fueled his actions. The event that should have united two families instead showcased the cracks created by selfish ambition. Vendors canceled services, photographers packed up, and relatives escorted the bride away. The wedding didn't end with vows or celebrations. It ended with exposed intentions, shattered trust, and a silence heavier than any breakup speech. The bride cornered him outside the venue, her dress dragging through gravel, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She demanded an explanation, not excuses, but truth. He stammered, insisting the documents were taken out of context, but she had seen enough to understand their relationship had been a facade. She replayed every moment he pushed for control, every time he dismissed her mother's efforts, and the pattern became undeniable. The realization that she had defended him against her own parents burned. She didn't scream, she asked one question. Did you ever love me, or just what I could give you? His silence answered for him. Panicked, he pivoted and blamed the mother, accusing her of sabotage and manipulation. He claimed she had always been jealous and controlling. But the guests had seen the documents, the texts, and the prenup. They knew the mother's decision wasn't spite but self-preservation. When he pointed fingers, the crowd pushed back. Relatives who once supported him now questioned his motives. His own credibility deteriorated with every accusation. Instead of rescuing his image, he only confirmed his cruelty. Blaming the woman he belittled only reinforced what everyone had witnessed. He valued assets over relationships and arrogance over accountability. Just when he seemed desperate enough to sway a few sympathizers, the buyer stepped forward. Calmly and professionally, he revealed that the groom had approached him earlier in the week, attempting to persuade him to forge signatures and expedite a retroactive transfer. The revelation was a nail in the coffin. Guests gasped as the buyer presented texts and voice messages documenting the attempt. The groom's plan wasn't just greedy, it was illegal. His attempt to secure property behind his fiancée's back exposed a depth of deception no one could excuse. It wasn't merely entitlement now, it was criminal intent. Because what happened after the wedding wasn't revenge, it was justice reshaped into consequence. Like I'm asking you to subscribe, you know the final strike is still coming. With evidence stacking against him and love dissolving into betrayal, the bride made her decision. She removed the engagement ring and set it on a table, not as dramatic symbolism, but as closure. There was no outburst or dramatic speech, just a firm, steady voice stating the wedding was off. The guests stood in stunned silence before some began to applaud, not for the failed wedding, but for her courage to walk away. She realized the man she nearly married was a stranger hungry for ownership, not partnership. And in the end it wasn't loss, it was escape. The ring lay still, So did his delusions. With the house no longer available and the bride no longer funding anything, the financial responsibility collapsed squarely onto the groom. Vendors demanded payment. The florist insisted on compensation for flowers that now wilted in the sun. Caterers expected reimbursement for lost supplies. The planner sent invoices. The groom, who had contributed little financially, suddenly faced the full weight of debt. Guests returned home. Contracts remained. His boastful claims of providing a perfect wedding now mocked him. Without the mother's support or the bride's income, the cost of arrogance became painfully literal. His gift request became the bill he couldn't pay. His parents, once thrilled with the match, watched the fallout in horror. They confronted him privately, demanding accountability for the humiliation he brought upon their family. They refused to cover his debts or defend his actions. His siblings, embarrassed by association, distanced themselves. Cousins who once admired his charm now whispered about his greed. The groom found himself suddenly alone, without family support, financial backing, or social credibility. He expected others to rescue him from the consequences of his choices, just as he always had. But this time, everyone stepped back. The isolation he forced on the mother now wrapped around him. Within days, the story spread beyond the wedding guests. Neighbors discussed it. Local vendors warned each other. Online posts circulated the details, from his disdainful remark to his attempted fraud. The narrative was simple: a groom who tried to exploit a family and lost everything. Invitations dried up. Business contacts avoided him. People crossed the street to avoid conversation. His carefully curated image, successful, charming, deserving, crumbled. Reputation, once his greatest currency, turned into debt no bank could erase. And while he tried to claim victimhood, the community saw the truth. His downfall was self-made. In the days that followed, the bride, now no longer a bride, showed up at her mother's door with swollen eyes and trembling hands. She apologized without excuses, acknowledging how blind she had been and how her silence had contributed to the disrespect. The mother listened quietly, not granting instant forgiveness but offering space for growth. Trust wasn't rebuilt with a single apology. It began with honesty and humility. They agreed to take things slowly, rebuilding a bond that had cracked under pressure, not shattered permanently. For the first time, the daughter saw her mother not as an obstacle, but as the only person who had truly protected her. Instead of sinking into guilt or bitterness, she used the money from the house sale to finally prioritize herself. She purchased a smaller home in a coastal town she'd always dreamed of retiring to. She took cooking classes, joined a reading group, and traveled, experiencing the freedom she had long delayed in favor of being everyone else's support system. She didn't flaunt her choices or boast. She simply lived. For the first time in decades, every decision she made benefited her happiness, not someone else's expectations. It wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming years of self-sacrifice and turning them into independence. Desperate and angry, the disgraced groom attempted one final move. He filed a lawsuit accusing her of sabotaging the wedding and stealing what he believed was rightfully his. In court, he confidently presented his claims, until the buyer and lawyer produced records of his attempted forgery and texts demanding illegal signature transfers. The judge dismissed the case almost immediately, reprimanding him for wasting court time and attempting fraud. Instead of gaining anything, he incurred legal fees and public embarrassment. The courtroom became yet another stage where his arrogance collapsed under documented reality. His defeat was not loud, but absolute. Motivated by the collapse and humbled by truth, the daughter chose a different path. She focused on her career, pursued promotions, and learned financial literacy, no longer tethered to the idea of wealth through marriage or inheritance. She rented a modest apartment near her mother's new place, valuing freedom over luxury. Slowly, she rebuilt her confidence, realizing she didn't need a husband or anyone to validate her choices. She recognized that love without respect is dependency, not partnership. The woman who once prioritized image now prioritized independence, and her mother watched with quiet pride. With his reputation ruined, relationships severed, and debts piling up, he had little choice but to leave town. He packed his belongings not for a fresh start, but to escape the consequences he could no longer outrun. Whispers followed him, and so did unpaid invoices and fractured friendships. In his new city, he tried to reinvent himself, but the past lingered like a shadow. His downfall wasn't dramatic or violent. It was gradual isolation, losing influence, opportunity, and admiration. The world he built on arrogance crumbled, leaving only regret and bitterness. The wedding that wasn't became a legend in the community. Guests retold the story at dinner parties and reunions, how the envelopes flipped the script in one unforgettable moment. The tale didn't center on the embarrassment, but on the brilliance of a woman who refused to be erased. The moment became cautionary and inspirational, a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded, and entitlement can be dismantled without theatrics. The groom hated the legacy. The mother never bragged, but she didn't hide from it either. The truth had spoken more loudly than any confrontation could. Sitting on her new porch overlooking the sea, she realized peace didn't come from witnessing his downfall. It came from reclaiming her life. She didn't waste energy on resentment. She poured it into hobbies, friendships, and self-worth. She understood now that disappearing wasn't defeat, it was a strategy. She gave him what he asked for, but not the way he intended. By stepping away, she protected her dignity and revealed his greed. Her final victory wasn't an explosion or spectacle. It was quiet freedom, choosing herself without apology. For the first time in decades, she felt whole. And that was the greatest gift of all.